Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to another makeup and movie Monday. Hope you're doing very well. So it has been a while since I have done a makeup and movie Monday. I kind of went through like this kind of phase where I was just like, you know what, I don't know if I should stop doing it. I don't know if I should bring it back. I don't know what kind of take I want to do on it, but I kind of had like a bit of an epiphany. I think it must have been like a week or so ago where I was just like, you know what, I really want to bring it back, but I want to bring it back in a different style. So what I would want to do now is essentially do something a bit different than I did last time. So last time I used to do a video talking about one specific movie, but now I want to kind of change it up a bit, and you know, from now for a few more weeks I want to kind of concentrate on genres. So in case you couldn't tell, this week I'm starting on my favourite genre, which is horror movies. But if this is your first time here, hello, my name is Ameena. I obviously have a YouTube channel. I like to talk about makeup, but then I also like to incorporate my own kind of things that I really love, which is like movies and music and comic books and, you know, collecting figures and stuff like that, which I'm slowly bringing into my channel. But yeah, if there's something that you're really interested in, please subscribe, because I'd love to have you part of my subscription people. And yeah, I'll be doing these every Monday. I am inspired by Bailey Sarian, of course, who does her murder mystery makeup Mondays. She is like the queen of it all, and I was just inspired to do like a movie take on it. So essentially what I'll be doing is putting on a full face of makeup, and I'll be talking about movies. So I will be talking about my favourite genre, which is horror. So before we get started, I forgot to wash my sponge, so I'll be right back. So that was a great start to the video. So I'm just going to get everything started. So essentially why I wanted to talk about horror is because it's a genre that has been with me ever since I was growing up. Like, I've mentioned it so many times before that my family are the type of like family where we just watch TV and we watch a lot of movies and we talk about this and that. Like, we're kind of like, we've grown up in front of the TV essentially, because my dad is a big like film fan and, you know, stuff like that. So we would always be watching stuff in front of the TV. Of course, like, you know, the whole typical watching dinner in front of the TV, waking up the first thing in the morning and turning the TV on and stuff like that. And it's kind of just embedded into me. And when it comes to movies, of course, I did watch a lot of films that I shouldn't have been watching when I was really young, but I think it kind of shaped into my love of film. So I've been like a fan of film ever since I was pretty much born. And I kind of go through phases of liking certain genres, but I think the main genre that always speaks out to me the most is horror movies. So I kind of wanted to kind of bring into this video like my favourite movies. Like, I have previously done my top 10 favourite horror films. If you do want to check that out, it is on my channel. It's, God, I definitely, yeah, it's been like, it's less than a year since I've done it. So if you do want to check it out, I do talk about them into slight depth and how and why I love them. But obviously today I will bring up a few and talk about some kind of gems and, you know, stuff like that. So my first experience of horror, I think when I was super young, I remember watching the TV version of It. So that's like the original It movie, the one with Tim Curry in it. And I just remember kind of going, what the fuck is this? Like, I never really knew about Stephen King. This was like when I was, God, I must have been like not even 10, younger than 10 when I had watched this for the first time. And I was pretty traumatized because clowns are supposed to be fun, they're supposed to be cute and entertaining, and then you have in this essentially a clown that's killing kids. So, you know, it's a good start to my childhood basically. But watching it, I was just so intrigued as to just everything about it, because obviously it's in a two-parter. So I remember watching it but always preferring the first half when they were kids, and it kind of goes with like the newer version as well. I do prefer the first version, like part one essentially. But when I remember watching it as a kid, I just remember kind of like this, like the thrill of being scared. Like, there's so many jump scares and there's so many kind of unnerving moments which people tend to really enjoy. And that's one thing that I do love about horror films, is the fact that even though sometimes they could be really cheesy and they can be really obvious, sometimes it's really great to have that thrill. I can honestly say I don't really get it a lot these days when watching like a lot of horror films. It's quite difficult for me to kind of pinpoint a film that really, you know, did that for me recently. I mean, maybe one of the last films that did that was Hereditary, but I mean, I have spoken about that being part of one of my favourite movies of all time, and like my favourite horror movie of all time, one of my favourite horror movies of all time, because it generally, for me, was like a bit of fresh air. I know a lot of people love Midsummer. For me, I don't essentially call that a horror film. I do quite call that like a psychological thriller, essentially, even though, yeah, it does have a lot of horror elements to it. But essentially, talking back for like my childhood, I do also remember watching a lot of like the original 80s ones. Obviously, like you have Nightmare on Elm Street, you have Halloween. Did that come out in the 80s? Even though, like, you know, those type of classic, you know, not monster, but like horror movies. But essentially, when I kind of got more and more into horror, that's when I discovered like Universal Monsters, and I am a very big fan, in case you don't really know much about me. I'm like obsessed with Universal Monsters. I collect a lot of their figurines. Like I have my little earrings, and just obsessed with like everything Universal Monsters. Like Bride of Frankenstein is one of my favourite monsters, and of course it was a great pathway, especially like in the 20s when all these kind of movies were starting up, and then Universal kind of came out with a lot of the films that are based around books. So obviously you have Dracula, then you have Frankenstein, and then Invisible Man, that were all originally books, and then when they incorporated them into movies, obviously they became, you know, much bigger than the book itself. Like obviously there's been dozens of, you know, versions of Dracula. There's been quite a handful of like Frankenstein, and, you know, a lot of like recently you've got the Invisible Man movie. But for me, when I like found Universal Monsters, it was kind of just like, okay, these are the originators, these are like the, you know, the big guns. Like I feel like a lot of people tend to forget that a lot of those movies were like the original ones that kind of bring a lot of scare factor, because obviously back in the day they weren't used to bloods and gore, and not that any of those films are any of that, but the fact that there was a doctor who made a creature out of old bodies, and he would like wreaked havoc on this town and killed a young girl, and, you know, it's just shocking to obviously people back in like the 20s and the 30s and stuff, whereas now people would just find it funny or boring. So it's amazing how a lot of people tend to forget about the originality of horror movies. But I felt like, you know, growing up in the 80s, like I grew up in the late 80s, so I was like I'm a 90s child essentially when you think about it. And during the 90s there weren't as many like horror films I kind of grew up watching. One of the ones that, well, the one that sticks out the most to me is Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola, and I again have spoken about that movie on my channel many times because I'm just so obsessed with it. It is just, I feel like it's not as kind of praised as it should be, in my opinion. Like a lot of people do like it for its kind of like cult status, and then you have like Keanu Reeves's terrible English accent, but then you have such an amazing cast. And I think for me it was just like my obsession with Gary Oldman. Basically growing up, like I was just obsessed with that man because he just is like a chameleon of movies, and him playing Dracula was kind of a dream come true when I discovered that movie. And, you know, I still am obsessed with it today. Like I put up a picture here of like the poster for it, which is like my favorite poster of all time, like the gargoyle one, and just watching it and kind of like it's kind of, it's a horror, but it's also got so many psychological elements to it as well, because it's essentially a man who loses his wife, and, you know, she kills herself, and he kind of lives forever, and, you know, just wants to find true love again. And it's crazy because it is so different from the Todd Browning one. Obviously you look at them both and they're very different, and obviously rightly so as well, because times change. And sorry, my hair is just all over the place. Yeah, times have changed and technology has changed and acting has changed, and to see them both is just, they're obviously very different films, but they both work so well in their own kind of capacity. But then when I was growing up in the 90s, like I'd mentioned, I was discovering all these horror films. So for the first time I did watch John Carpenter's Halloween, and then watching Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and stuff. I can honestly say that Friday the 13th is not one of my favourite kind of horror type movies, because I've never really been into the whole like teenagers obsessed with like sex and drugs and stuff, and they just like, well, I'm so drugged, I'm just gonna go to Camp Crystal Lake and get like it's cool and it's fun, but I really just prefer Jason as the killer. Whereas I think with something like Halloween, it's my favourite horror film of all time, just because John Carpenter is just amazing. I feel like with those type of movies, and again it's the same with Nightmare on Elm Street, like it has elements of those stupid teenagers who just want to like get laid and just have lots of sex and stuff like that, whereas I feel like they don't have it on such a higher level as like Friday the 13th does. Like I still like Friday the 13th, and I really love Jason Takes Manhattan. It's just one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. It's just so stupid, but I love it. But I just feel like the kind of characters in like Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street just bring a little bit more to like the story itself, and they're just a bit more kind of interesting. No offense to any of the characters in Friday the 13th, but yeah, when I was growing up and watching the movies, it would just kind of, when you're just like, oh my god, you're discovering something for the first time, and it's just shocking and amazing. And I do really love like the Halloween movies, like John Carpenter, like I mentioned, like he created like just some fantastic movies. Obviously you wouldn't call Big Trouble in Little China and Escape from New York and stuff like that horror movies. They're not. It just shows a director can be so diverse and just so kind of just amazing. And when I watched Halloween for the first time, honestly, I just fell in love with it, and I love Jamie Lee Curtis. I think she is just a fantastic actress. It was like one of her first roles that she was in, and she did like an amazing job. And obviously her mum was in Psycho, Janet Leigh, which again, Hitchcock, in like horror itself, being one of the kind of original pioneers of like psychological thrillers. But going on to kind of like my favourite films itself, because I'm going quite quickly through my makeup. Yeah, like I said, I do have my list. So, Halloween is up there. The Exorcist is obviously one of my favourite films like of all time. Where else are we going? We're going, let's look at my t-shirt actually. Yeah, we've got like Dracula's here, you've got it, you've got The Shining, of course, American Werewolf in London, and just, I've gone through most of my life watching so many horror films that a lot of them tend to just blend into one. Not in a horrible way, but you kind of just like, oh yeah, I've seen this like a million times. Like I've seen The Exorcist, like just saying that whole quote from Beetlejuice, I've seen it like 67 times and it keeps on getting funnier, even though I don't find it funny. But I don't find it as scary as when I did in the first place, but I still find it just iconic cinema. Like just the whole build up to the everything happening, it scares the shit out of me. Like the whole of this, like 13-14-year-old Reagan, who is like a normal sweet girl, and then she just suddenly turns into this demon overnight, it's just amazing cinema. And I feel like back when it was made, it just was so different, and that's what I love about certain horror movies, because obviously that was originated from a book. When I read the book, there's so many different elements to it, so that's why I feel like William Peter Blatty didn't like the movie as much, even though I still think it's a fantastic movie. Obviously, just settle down, so I'm just waiting for my eye base to just dry up a little bit. But yeah, going back and watching like a lot of people, if they watch certain horror movies now, they wouldn't find it as scary, where they would find something like Hostel scary. I don't find that type of like horror gore, torture gore interesting. For me, horror's always been like playing with the mind and playing with like your weaknesses, like, you know, what are you afraid of, you know, even if it's not just like clowns or spiders and stuff, but just like, you know, death and someone stalking you and your dreams and stuff, you know. And movies that I kind of feel like are underrated, like there's a movie called Trick or Treat, which I think is now getting a lot of recognition, because when it first came out, no one was really talking about it. Because I remember when I worked in the cinema in Leicester Square in London, they were holding Fright Fest, and it actually showed, but it was in a very small screen, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. It had a really cool cast. It has a really cool cast, and it was produced by Bryan Singer, who obviously a lot of people don't really want to talk about now, so that's fine. He did direct one of my favourite films of all time, but anyway, I feel like at the time no one was really talking about Trick or Treat, but now that a lot of people kind of discovered it and have seen Sam, which is like the little boy in like the orange kind of suit and like the rucksack, not rucksack, but like the sack on his head, a lot of people know what Trick or Treat is now, and it's such an underrated movie. It's one of those kind of anthology kind of movies where things are happening but they all kind of collide together. I'm not going to spoil it. If you haven't seen it, I would really recommend watching it. It is a lot of fun. And then also, I don't know if you would call it underrated, but Sinister is definitely like one of my favourite kind of underrated movies. Like Ethan Hawke is amazing in it, and of course they made a second one, which, you know what, I've only ever seen once. I don't know why I've only seen it once, even though I thought it was okay. It wasn't as good as the first one, but it still had some kind of good elements to it. What other movies? I'm trying to think, like through my childhood I used to be obsessed with like certain horror films, and there was, you know, The Faculty is amazing. Like I remember watching that film when I was young and just like, this movie is really cool. It's got like all the cool kids and like Josh Hartnett in there and stuff like that, and I just think that's a really great movie. And then obviously you think of the big ones like Scream and what else? My brain kind of just goes a bit dead after a while. And then yeah, like obviously like Wes Craven and is one of the best directors ever when it comes to horror movies. And when I was kind of looking online to kind of like refresh my mind about some good directors, obviously I remembered that Tim Burton is up there. Like for me, he's always, like John Carpenter, a director of so many different like styles. A lot of his styles are the same in the sense of the movies of like the genres that he makes, because obviously he's done superhero movies and he's done like thrillers, and a lot of his movies are not thrillers, but as in like, you know, just kind of, yeah, they're just like weird, because obviously we all know that Tim Burton makes really weird movies, but when it comes to like horror, obviously he's done Beetlejuice, which is freaking amazing. Again, one of my favourite kind of horror. I don't know if you want to call it horror. I know it's horror, but it has elements of not being horror, if that makes sense. It's kind of got like, it's a dark comedy. It's like a black comedy, so it's really funny, and it is a lot of fun. Yeah, that kind of just kind of goes about with what I'm trying to talk about, and I feel like my brain is turning off slightly because I've been talking so much, and my makeup, it takes me a while to get used to like putting on makeup and talking at the same time, even though I've been doing this for like almost a year. But how I feel like how horror has changed over the years, I know I did brush up on it slightly earlier, but I feel, you know, it's quite important to talk about like the change of horror, because now I don't feel like there's a lot of movies out there that kind of speak to me. There's so many like different styles of horror. Like I said, there's the kind of like the kind of Hostel type movies, which I fucking hate, even though I do quite enjoy the Saw movies. I have seen all of them and I enjoy them all in their own capacity. I guess that's me being kind of, you know, undermining myself in that sense, but yeah, I think they're just stupid like switch your brain off type movies, even though some of them are very clever. And I just personally, I don't know, what was the last good horror film I saw? It's difficult to try and remember the last good horror film I saw. Again, Midsummer I saw like last year, only because we put it on DVD, and I was like, you know what, I haven't seen it yet. Everyone's been raving about it. Hereditary was fantastic, and let's give this a go. And I did really enjoy it, and I know a lot of people really hype up about it because it is really good. Like, if you haven't seen it and you did enjoy Hereditary, they're very different movies, but when you think about the different types of horror that it brings, it is very like psychological and very kind of like Wicker Man-esque, which I like. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to do my mascara and my lips off camera, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back, and to kind of finish everything off, I wanted to kind of talk about how I feel what might be the future for horror. And it's very difficult to kind of me to even determine that, because who knows what will bring it for movies in the future. But honestly, I don't think that some horror can really be the same as it used to be, because I know, like I mentioned, technology has changed, and you know, different art styles and like filming techniques have kind of changed over the years, because everything is like, oh, let's do CGI, let's do green screens and stuff like that, where I feel like there might still be some directors out there who are so passionate about being authentic when it comes to, you know, bringing really good stories to the screen. So I really hope that the horror genre isn't dying, because, you know, a lot of people just want cheap scares, or they want just to be scared in the soon as they kind of start watching a film. But yeah, let me know what your favourite horror film is. If you don't like horror, why not? I know a lot of people don't like horror movies, but let me know what your favourite horror film is. What do you think is in store for like the horror genre in the future? Yeah, thank you so much for watching, and you know, welcome back my little series. Next week I will talk about another genre. I'm not sure which one yet, and I'm going to do like my research and, you know, the whole shabam that I normally do. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Again, please don't forget to like and subscribe, because I film and upload every time I get a chance to. Don't forget to follow me on my social media, because I'm always active on there. And yeah, I hope you're doing well, happy, safe and healthy, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.